You and your party are adventuring through a cave. The deeper you get, the more the ground trembles, and rocks begin to fall around you. And when you enter a large clearing, you encounter a red dragon. A dangerous, impatient, mighty dragon, lashing around as he's trying to read a book for the past 6 months. Huh. Oh, okay. The fantasy world is amazing. And honestly, I'm not sure why I love it so much. There's just a lot in fantasy that I love, but the coolest thing is that it's a world that we could never have. With magic, dungeons, adventuring around the globe with a party of other adventurers, wanting fame, fortune, glory, and adventure. Maybe I just like Dungeons and Dragons. Anywho, fantasy is so cool. But I talked about this last week. But hard fantasy is just so interesting. Kingdoms and magic, weapons and knights. But the staple of fantasy is the dragon. There isn't a monster, creature, or beast that is more synonymous with fantasy than the dragon. A massive winged lizard that spits fire, if not fire, other elements from ice to poison to lightning. Dragons are super cool, and media itself knows it. Games are named after them, dragons are often a major, if not a final boss. They make for powerful weapons or armor out of their remains. People are given titles with dragon in their name to show how powerful they are. Dragons are cool. However, interestingly, in most of the Webtoon verse, dragons kind of play a different role. Except in Omniscient Reader and Maya's Class Hunters, in which they're just these massive monsters that they fight, dragons are either weirdly developed characters with a unique personality, or a part of the supporting cast. Anywhere from the advanced player of the tutorials tower Azure Dragon, to the greatest estate developers Solitas Red Dragon. Anywhere from mentors to creatures that burn human waste for the good of humanity. The greatest estate developer is wild. But there's actually a series that not only has a dragon in a major role, but the most major role. The main role being the main character. That's right, the protagonist. The main character, the starring role is a dragon. Let me explain. Carcerian, Adventures of a Red Dragon is exactly what it says on the tin. It follows the adventures of the Red Dragon Carcerian, or however you pronounce it. Carcerian, or Aaron, which is way easier to say and I'm not embarrassed by saying it, is actually a 316-year-old red dragon living in a cave when the series starts. 316 years old, which is actually pretty young. Aaron is one of, if not the youngest dragons currently in existence. He's really just a kid that ran away from home, a kid that wanted to be where the people are. I've used that joke already too many times, twice now. Anyways, Aaron isn't this ancient, powerful red dragon locked away in a cave with his hordes of loot facing off against powerful adventurers that are looking for fame and fortune. He's just this rebellious little punk. No better than the 15-year-old brat who swears just as much as John Doe from An Ordinary because he thinks it's cool. Aaron is a little brat, but no matter how much of a brat he is, he's still a dragon. One of the most powerful creatures in the world, no matter how young. After running away, he spends 6 months trying to read a tiny book. That's actually human-sized, but for him, it's tiny. Spending all this time looking for one spell. The Law of Polymorph, a shape-shifting spell. And after a simple chant, shrinks down into a red-headed human child. Apparently around 20, but they looked like a kid. Much easier to draw without all those scales and stuff, right? Aaron wants the adventurer's life without fully realizing what the adventurer's life actually means. And as he goes to adventure, his life as a human is actually really terrible. Immediately after becoming human, he is attacked by a massive group of orcs. Luckily, or unluckily, saved by a wandering group of adventurers. I say unluckily because these guys aren't just any adventurers, they're people who look for people to sell as slaves. I don't know the actual term, but they find people to sell as slaves. And unfortunately for Aaron, he's on that list. A kid pretending to have no memory being sold into a slave house where he's then bought by Darius, the first knight of Carcel, the Silver Knight, and more importantly, a dragon slayer. Sure, the first person that Eren encountered literally took him in, pretended to be his friend, and immediately sold him into slavery, but surely this guy will be different, right? Well, that doesn't appear to be the case. Sure, at first Darius and the other dragon slayers seem kind, but they also weirdly dress up Eren to be the princess of their nation, Princess Iona, even magically changing his voice to sound exactly like the princess. And they don't really give a good reason for it either, just that the princess couldn't make it and they need a placeholder to go to another kingdom. And that's the start of a fun series, right? A young brat of a dragon wanting the taste of being an adventurer becomes a princess through some totally normal and not suspicious means at all, right? Yeah, you called it. It's not exactly legit. And to the series' credit, that's kind of the point. I mentioned hard fantasy at the beginning of this video, and I mean two things by that. Yeah, sure, completely new fantasy world, basically nothing in common with our world, yada yada yada, all that fun stuff. But what I more mean is the word brutal. It's not this pretty fantasy world with fun magic and adventurers and walking on sunshine. It's the equivalent of get used to a kid, that's life, and oh boy does life get hard for Eren. You see, a bunch of dragon slayers didn't just get together to buy someone just because they could. They did it because they needed a quote-unquote princess. A standby princess that can play a part but isn't actually important. You see, we need to explain the world a little bit. There are 6 nations, and they all agreed that whenever problems would arise, they would hold council meetings to decide things instead of mobilizing their military power. And a rule for this was that successors to the throne must attend. This makes sense. Instead of solving their problems through war, they gather together to solve their problems through talking. And to show trust and faith in each other, they bring their successors. Karsil, the kingdom where the dragon slayers are from, was under some suspicion. So instead of solving their problems through talking, they basically decide to declare war on the kingdom that hosts the meeting, to kill their ruler and keep their power. And to make sure their successor wasn't in harm's way, they got a fake. Unfortunately, our main character. And when his usefulness is up, they want him dead. The series is weirdly real, like to a strange degree real. Of course, not real in the aspect of real life or even relatable. Our main character is literally a 300-year-old dragon who ran away from home, who stole a magic book and that had a spell that let him shapeshift into a human, who immediately was captured and sold to slavery and then pretended to be a princess and then marked for death. Yeah, surprisingly, that aspect isn't really that realistic. But what I meant more is that these characters are. They just feel very real, very human in a sense. I'll get to Eren last, the dragon, but I think the characters that exemplify this the most are the dragon slayers. There are 4 of them. The Silver Knight Darius, the one I mentioned before, the Royal Mage Gaster, no, not that Gaster, Pluto the Vice Captain, and Vera the best exorcist in Helis, wherever that is. These 4 characters are really the first 4 main cast other than Eren himself. Now, you might be a little confused by these 4. I mentioned that these characters felt very realistic, very human, and then brought up a dragon, and then the only 4 people to have killed a dragon, but that's just it. The term Dragon Slayer is a really interesting title to put on these people. When you hear a Dragon Slayer, you expect someone who's confident, powerful, that strides around believing they're gods, but they don't. In fact, every single time their dragon fright is brought up, they laugh at the rumors. They explain how overwhelmed and underprepared they were. Every time they explain the fight, it barely feels like they won, which is interesting because we know they did. They have dragon-scaled armor. Gaster has a dragon heart, a magic thing, unimportant. We know they won the fight, but every time they bring it up, it feels like they didn't. But I weirdly love how they talk about it, because it doesn't feel like an adventurer recounting their heroic tales. It's almost like a war vet explaining the painful and terrifying experiences they've had. Ones that will stay with them forever. Ones that'll keep them up at night. Ones that have made them feel fear and dread. And they all have these little moments when that story comes up, and I really do love that. I kind of love how they aren't these boastful adventurers filled with pride about their accomplishments. They're weirdly realistic about it. Not only about their accomplishments, but their conversations. They feel grounded, they feel human, even if they've killed a dragon. And speaking of dragons, Eren wanted nothing more to be an adventurer, to go out on these journeys, to save the day, to be a hero, but he's a dragon. 316 years old, but still a child, basically. And what's really interesting so far is that the series shows us that Eren is not hero material. Sure, he's strong, not only is he a dragon, but as a human, he has access to spirit magic, or elemental magic, I forgot what it was called. A separate magic to standard mages. And he wants to adventure, but he actively does not care about others. He kills without remorse, he doesn't empathize with others. So much so that he actively had to ask what it meant to be sad because he didn't understand what it meant to be sad for others. And weirdly, that makes a lot of sense. Eren is a dragon. He hasn't really experienced empathy. Barely with other dragons, much less humans. Not to mention, most humans have used him and then thrown him on the side like garbage, which I think is the point. Carcerian Adventures of a Red Dragon is shockingly realistic, to a scary degree. Everything just makes a lot of sense. Most adventurers are self-centered, only care what's in it for them. Nations and kingdoms are conniving, wanting to keep their power no matter who they have to kill. And dragons aren't these magical, beautiful creatures, they're dangerous and destructive, to the point where even winning a battle with them seems to have actively taken something away from you. In its cuter art style and humorous moments, it's a weirdly realistic series that I'm enjoying thoroughly. So make sure you check out Carcerian, Adventures of a Red Dragon, updating every week on Webtoon.